we let Angela take over, and here is her presentation about the 5 W's of DNA.
Well, hello, welcome. I'm so glad that all of you guys are here today with us. I'm just going to move something out of my way there. So today I am going to kind of start back at the beginning. I'm going to be talking about how to get started with DNA testing and focus on finding answers to your genetic genealogy questions. So I am sorry, my little pen light is on and I'm trying to get rid of it. There we go. So occasionally I will mention genealogy standards. These genealogy standards were written by the board for certification of genealogists. These standards are not only for professional genealogists, but they are for everyone who researches their family. If you want to go to their website that's listed there, they have many examples of genealogical research. You can also find this book on their website and at Amazon or wherever you purchase books. They have a Kindle version of it, so I have it on my computer. But I will be referring, when I talk about genealogy standards, I'm referring to this book. So first we're going to get started with a few poll questions. So what type of DNA tests have you done? And you can choose more than one: an autosomal test, a mitochondrial test, a Y-DNA test. You've tested, but you have no clues to what type of test you took, or you have not yet tested.
Can you guys see the poll?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Do you have one that has 23andMe?
So they'll be in our next question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me. Didn't go far enough down the screen.
Okay, we'll leave it up for another moment or two so you can finish. I think most of you have responded, but we'll give you another moment if you're still thinking about some of your answers. Okay, I'll go ahead and close the poll and we can see the results.
Nope.
So a lot of you guys have taken autosomal tests, and a few of you have also taken mtDNA and Y-DNA tests. A few of you don't know what type of test you took, and that's okay. We'll figure that out. And nobody has, so all of you guys have tested. So that's awesome. we're going to go ahead with our next question, and that's asking where you've actually tested.
Yeah, all three questions were on the same poll.
Oh,
so I think they've
I'm
finished.
sorry. I need to move the poll over so I can actually see it all. Sorry. So where have you tested? A lot of you have tested at Ancestry. 7 of you have tested at Family Tree DNA. 7 of you have test results at MyHeritage. 8 of you at 23andMe, and 1 of you at Living DNA. That is awesome. And then why did you test? I have to move my screen here. Sorry, I'm out of the way. Unknown parentage or adoption. 1 of you. There's a brick wall for 5 of you. To support your genealogy research, you were just curious. Somebody recruited me. 4 out of 16 of you. Somebody recruited you. So that is awesome. All right. So we're going to take a look at how we can use DNA to help support your research, maybe break down a few of those brick walls, and help you answer some of those questions. So there's all the results. Stop sharing that. Can you see my screen now, or is it still showing the poll?
No, I can see it.
Okay. There we go. They're still showing it on my end. So before you spit into a tube or ask a relative, one of the things that we should do is to stop and ask ourselves the following questions. Who should we test? What kind of test should we take? When should we test? Where should we test? And why should we be testing? And so you guys have already answered some of those questions. Hold on just a second here. My mouse does not like my screen today, and as such, it is not advancing. There we go. So most of us start our genealogy journey by building trees, and we start with ourselves and we work our way back up through time, through the generations. So we're working upwards from ourselves down, up through our parents, and then we see our grandparents. But with DNA, we need to think a little bit differently. And we need to start thinking about where our parents and grandparents and our great-grandparents are, and working downwards, because those people that are down at the bottom here, those are going to be our matches, our shared DNA matches. When you talk about grandparents or great-grandparents, a lot of us in genealogy refer to that as the most recent common ancestor, and whatever level of grandparent that might be. And then the people that are down here, these are your DNA matches. So you do share the same grandparent at whatever level, but down here, these are the people that you're going to be talking to, that you're going to want to figure out who they are. Those are your DNA matches. So why even take a DNA test? What are you hoping to discover once you get the results? So as our poll indicated, a lot of us were curious. We just wanted to know more about where we came from. We wanted to answer some questions that arose out of doing our documentary, our genealogy research that we had done in the past. Some of us have adoption or unknown parentage questions. Some of us have been working on genealogy for quite a long time, and we want to be able to break down some of those brick walls that we have, and we're hoping that DNA may be able to give us those answers. And finally, we may have just been given a DNA test as a gift from one of our friends or relatives, or recruited by somebody else to do DNA. And once you've been recruited, the bug's kind of been bit and you're interested in finding out more about your test results. So when you're interested in DNA testing for any genealogy research, the genealogy standards say that research begins with and follows a dynamic plan for gathering information from resources. The plan's purpose is to meet stated objectives, usually in the form of research questions. So, what's your objective? And for those of you that have already tested, how has your results changed what your objective is? Do you have new objectives? Have you actually sat down and thought about where you're going to next? Standard 51 talks specifically about DNA testing and the need for an effective plan for DNA testing is selected and targeted. Genealogists select DNA tests, testing companies, and analytical tools for their potential to address the genealogy research questions. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. The first step in DNA testing is to create a research question. This definition here comes again from the genealogy standards, their glossary. And a question is a question that research aims to answer in genealogy, a focused question that seeks unknown information about a specific person and that helps frame the research scope, lead to relevant information, and identify evidence. So, what does this research question look like? When you develop a research question, you should be looking at a unique individual in a specific time, a specific place, and in a specific family unit. You should write your question down. Even if it's the same question you've been asking yourself for the last 30 years, you should write it down. If your question is focused enough to make sure that it can identify a unique individual. So in my case, I have a couple of burning questions that I'm interested in. Who are the parents of James Fraser, who married Priscilla Sword in Washington, D.C. in 1821? This question was generated because James Fraser is a brick wall in my documentary research. And I'm hoping that DNA might give me some additional hints as to his ancestry. So that's one of my questions. Another question I have are, who are the parents of Benjamin Hilliard, who married Mary Rosanna Sauter in Washington, D.C. in 1858? Standard 9 talked about having a dynamic plan. This question arose from my DNA results. A dynamic plan is always changing based on the pieces of information you've received. I have a large group of DNA matches that I know are related to each other, but they do not have any of my known surnames in their tree. So my question comes from, how are they related to me? And could it be through this weird family? So I have my research questions. Now I need to figure out what test to take. So there are 3 different main types of tests. The Y test, it follows the male line. It goes from you to your father, to your grandfather, to your great-grandfather. It only comes through the male line. For the mitochondrial test, that goes through the female line. So it goes from you to your mother to your grandmother and follows your mother's line. As you can see in this, both males and females do have mitochondrial DNA, and they can do an mtDNA test. The autosomal test is what you see there in the center. You get pieces of DNA from your parents, who in turn get it from your grandparents. And so all of that is passed down to their descendants. And that is what an autosomal test is. It is the most common type of test. It's where you typically get the most shared results. Ancestry is an autosomal test. If you tested at 23andMe, that's an autosomal test, as well as MyHeritage. So going back to basics, we take mom's DNA and dad's DNA, and those mix to create a unique individual. That's you. And if your siblings test, they will have a lot of the same DNA, but they will have a different mix. Maybe they inherited a little bit more from dad than mom, or mom than dad. So there's an advantage to test multiple siblings because you will get a few new DNA matches, especially if you have a difficult DNA problem to resolve. Take a look at testing your siblings or your cousins, and several different cousins instead of just one. The same notion that you inherit DNA from your mom and your dad is the reason why you do not need to test children if you've already tested their parents. Unless, of course, if their parents are biologically their children. So the inheritance percentages per generation, this is how it works going back through the generations. Parents each share about 50% of your DNA. You inherit about 25% of your DNA from each of your 4 grandparents, and it continues to split as you go back through the generations. So you can see when you get down to your 3rd great-grandparent, the average is that you inherited about 3% of DNA from your 32 3rd great-grandparents, but that can easily swing, a little bit higher or a little bit lower. So it's possible that as you go further back in time, you did not inherit DNA from a particular great-grandparent. And so that line may not show up when you do your DNA tests. Here's another graph that shows a lot of the same information. These numbers are coming from the ISOG wiki, and their website is listed up there. I know that isog.org is listed in your handout. That is a great website to go to. It is a wiki all about doing DNA testing, doing genetic genealogy. And so if you have some questions, if you want to take a look and explore, there's a lot of great information on that website. So across the top, it's talking about a couple of different testing locations from 23andMe, from Ancestry DNA, and from Family Tree DNA, their Family Finder test, which is their autosomal test. And so if you take a look at that, if you're testing and you're trying to locate your first or second cousin, there's almost 100% chance that you will be able to identify those. And about 90% of your third cousins. When you get down to your fourth, fifth, and sixth cousins, there is still the probability of being able to identify them. But what happens is that you may not be able to locate all of your fourth through sixth cousins just using DNA. And it's not that they're not related to you, it is because you or they did not inherit enough of that same DNA to show up as a DNA match. This is one of the reasons why I encourage people to, if you have DNA matches and you've matched with, say, a second cousin, maybe 2 or 3 second cousins, ask them to share their DNA results with you, work together and collaborate, and you may discover, as I did, a whole new world, lots of new matches that maybe your cousins have that you do not have, even though you share the same common ancestors. So where are we going to test? The testing companies, a lot of you guys have already tested at Ancestry, which is great. I typically recommend, if you're just jumping into DNA, to go with Ancestry. It does have the largest amount of test takers, and as a result of that, you typically get more shared DNA matches. And Ancestry is an autosomal test. MyHeritage is also an autosomal test. It's based out of Israel, and its original focus was gathering information about families in Eastern Europe. And so if you have a lot of Eastern European ancestry that you think about, MyHeritage is a great place to go to get to put your DNA results there or to test there to find matches. 23andMe, I know some of you have tested there as well. Their original focus was on health screenings. So they do have a lot of information to help out genetic genealogists, but your test matches, if you reach out to them to ask them questions or find out how they're related, you may not be able to get a response because these people originally tested to find out if they carried, say, the breast cancer gene or other health information, and they're not really interested in family trees, doing genealogy, and so they may not answer you, or they may not have the information once you get in touch with them. The other 2 testing companies are Family Tree DNA, which is often abbreviated FTDNA, and Living DNA. Living DNA is the newest testing company, and they're slowly refining their product, upgrading their website. It is an autosomal test. Living DNA is based in England, and one of their focuses is being able to pinpoint very narrowly where your ethnicity came from. So in England, they're trying to pinpoint down to a county level. They also have a project going on in Germany so they can narrow down where in Germany that you may have, your ancestors may have came from. Family Tree DNA is a place where you can not only do the autosomal test, which is called Family Finder, but this is the only company where you can do Y-DNA testing, which, as you remember, is tracing your father's line, or your mitochondrial testing, which is testing your mother's line. When you do test your father's line, I know some of you guys had said that you've already done a Y-DNA test. The Y-DNA tends to mutate so that you can see when you get your results back, hopefully you'll see common surnames, and that you may be able to pinpoint how they're related to you and when a mutation took place. So if a mutation took place maybe at your great-grandfather's level, and then maybe back further, another 2 generations, another mutation, and then that your DNA results can branch off from whatever ancestor based on what mutations exist. With your mitochondrial DNA test, this is not a test that is the first thing that I go to test for doing genetic genealogy. It does show your mother's line. However, it does not mutate very quickly. And so it's difficult to tell if one of your matches is from a common great-grandmother from 200 years ago, or if it was an ancestor from 500 years ago. Mitochondrial tests are better if you do have that research question that you're trying to ask, if you have no idea who the mother of someone is that you're researching, or maybe you're trying to identify if your grandfather, great-grandfather, however back you're going, had 2 wives, and you wanted to find out who your ancestor came from. Was it from the first wife or the second wife? And mitochondrial DNA testing is great in those ways because it's either saying, yes, this ancestor is part of this mitochondrial line, or no, she is not part of that mitochondrial line. But remember, the best company is wherever you find the magic match that helps with your research. So what on your handout, if you take a look at that, I did mention about transferring your DNA results. In the handout, there is more information about who accepts transfers and who does not. And there's a blog post there that will walk you through how to share your DNA by downloading your raw DNA data and then uploading it to the various companies. So who should you test? Well, that all depends on who is your research. What is your research question? Who are you trying to locate? But typically the person that we are researching that we want to test comes from the oldest generation, the person that's closest in time to whatever your research question is. And then focusing on a cousin or 2 that's on the line that you're researching. So if I'm researching on my father's line, I will want to go ahead and try to locate all the cousins possible that would be on that line. So sometimes there's no one to test, or you think there's no one to test. Again, I encourage you to go back to your family tree. And I know when I first started building my family tree, I'd list my grandmother and all of her siblings and maybe their marriages, but I might not have traced down who all of my second cousins were and who my second cousins married. And then certainly going back to my third cousins and my 4th cousins, I didn't make my tree that robust because I was more focused on going backwards in time. And I wasn't particularly interested in the people that were living currently, unless I had a brick wall and I thought if I reached out to them, they may be able to give me some answers. But I certainly didn't go and make a concerted effort to gather all of those names. So that's one of the things that you'll want to do. I highly recommend that you utilize obituaries because they do list out family units, and it kind of fills in that gap between the last census and today. And then, of course, be on the lookout here. April 1st, the 1950 census is going to be released. It's not going to be all indexed immediately, but you'll be able to get into it. You'll be able to look at new people, new family units to maybe help find some of those brick walls and identify. You have those shared matches and you're like, how do these people relate to me? I don't know. And you may be able to get some clues in the new census that's coming out. Another thing that you need to do is when you're thinking about who to test, make sure that you're getting informed consent. Again, on your handout, I listed a link to Judy Russell's blog, and she talks all about informed consent and how important it is. And then she, in her handout, in her blog, has a link to some handouts that you should print out and take with you whenever you're asking anybody to donate their DNA, to take one of the tests for you, to find out what they're comfortable with. And it's not good enough to just walk up there and say, hey, do you mind doing a DNA test for me? You need to make sure that they have informed consent. And a key part of that is being informed. They need to know what they're doing, how it's going to be shared, who can see it. And it's better to have those conversations up front. If you find something unexpected, do they want to know? Because you don't want to get the results back and have this aha moment that's going to shatter somebody's world and they will not expect it at all, And so then you're left saying, should I tell them? Should I not tell them? If I tell them, what should I tell them? So get informed consent before you do the DNA test, before you send in the testing kit to the company. I can't emphasize that enough. It's vitally important to anybody who wants to ethically test people for DNA. So this is going back to my research question. Who are the parents of James Fraser, who married Priscilla Sword in Washington, D.C. in 1821? This question was generated because of a brick wall I have in my documentary research. So James Fraser has a range for his birthday of more than 10 years. I have a very strong family tradition that James came from Scotland, but I also have paper records that show he was from England. And so what I'm hoping to do is find out more information to gather some clues by taking a DNA test or focusing my DNA research on James Fraser and what I might find. So here is a truncated part of his family tree. There's James up at the top. He was born sometime between 1782 and 1795. And as I said, he may have been born in Scotland. He may have been born in England. So there are many, 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 many James Frasers out there. And to be able to narrow that down, I haven't been able to do that. And so that is the goal of my DNA testing. So following James, he had a son, James M., who had a son, Charles, and then James S., who had two sons, Doc Fraser and Melville. And all of those in yellow are deceased. So who should I test out of those living individuals? Robin, Jean, Brenda, Cammie, and Michelle. Who would you test first? So I would first test Robin and either Jean or Brenda, and I would do an autosomal test, and I would do it at Ancestry. And the reason I would do that is because I'm testing two people, Robin and Jean, I'm getting two different branches from the same family. So I may pick up new cousins, new results. Whereas Jean and Brenda are siblings, and they may not have, they may share more DNA in common than Jean and Robin would. Now, I talked about testing the oldest individual, but that's in a generation. So Robin and Jean and Brenda are all in the same generation, even though there's 19 years difference between Jean and Brenda. So it doesn't matter which one you pick between Jean and Brenda to do testing. And then if you take a look at Cammie and Michelle, well, remember that children inherit their DNA from their parents. So by testing Cammie or Michelle, there is no unique DNA that I am going to receive by testing them. So I don't need to consider testing them at all. So that would be my first step, that autosomal test at Ancestry. My next step would be to download my raw DNA and upload it. And I'd upload it at Family Tree DNA and MyHeritage. That would give me, for the same test, I would get more results at different locations. And then my next step would be Robin, it doesn't say here, but he is, he's a man. So I would ask him to do a Y-DNA test and see if I can't get any clues. So that Y-DNA test is taken at Family Tree DNA. If Robin was a woman, who would I test? If all of my living test takers are women, what I would need to do is go back to James S. to see if he had any sons, or to Charles to see if he had any other sons other than James, and then follow their lines down to see if I can't find a son of a son of a son that would be willing to do DNA testing. So my next question was, who are the parents of Benjamin Hilliard, who married Mary Roseanne Sauter in Washington, D.C. in 1858? And this question actually arose out of my DNA results. I have a large group of DNA matches that are related to each other based on shared matches, but I do not have any of my known surnames in their trees. I always assume that these matches came from my Hilliard line. And the reason for that is my Hilliard family is a brick wall. And just by researching their surname, I have found them located in a county in Virginia that is a Burke County, and there are no records there. And so other than knowing that Benjamin was born in Virginia, I don't have any clue as to his line. And so maybe he wasn't the father of the individual that I think of. Maybe he wasn't the father of Benjamin Hilliard, and these unknown matches are related to me, and it's a new and unique surname. This happens all the time when you have a case of unknown parentage. So how do you identify when you're going through your shared match list? You want to start at the top of your matches and then identify all those people that you know. Obviously, you'd recognize parents and siblings, but if you have a first cousin once removed, a second cousin, you want to identify all of those known relatives. And then if you're working in Ancestry and more recently with MyHeritage, they have colored dots that you can group your families with. So I may not know who an individual match is, but I can tell taking a look at the shared match list between my test taker and this individual, what branch of the family he came from. What surnames does he have in common with me? And I would label those as colored dots. And then I take a look at all the other individuals that are in his shared match list with me and give them the same colored dots. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the entire shared match list and I'm breaking it down to say, this came from my dad's dad, and this came from my mom's dad, and trying to sort out the different families and who those shared matches are. And so you're reviewing all of your shared matches. You're going from your known to your unknown. And just because you label them with the colored dot, it doesn't mean absolutely positively they're on this line, but it's a clue to start breaking down so you can spend some time researching the family lines that you're interested in. So instead of researching 100 people, you've been able to break down that list to maybe only 25 people. So this is what I did with my DNA. So down at the very bottom, BJG, that was the test taker. And you see Melville there and James. So on the far left, that is the Fraser line. And in the center there is Benjamin F. That's Benjamin Hilliard that I was thinking maybe my shared matches that I could not identify, maybe it's those individuals. So one of the things, I do have a couple of names, and the reason for that is I have a marriage record for a John Hilliard and a Christina Kyman, but I am almost positive that Christina Kyman is not her maiden name. I believe that she's been married more than once, and she has a daughter that is about 20 years older than Benjamin. And so I don't know if John was Benjamin's father, or maybe he married her when Benjamin was a young child. John died before the 1850 census. And so I have absolutely no records. Again, burnt counties in Virginia, I have not been able to find any information. So when you take a look at my chart, what I've done is I've colored in blue anybody that I know I have genetically found a match with. Okay, so if you take a look on the far left with James M, I genetically have a match with some second cousins, third cousins that are descendant from James from a different sibling. So that indicates that he is correct as one of my ancestors. The line just below them, Charles, Georgiana, Van Buren, and Ella, I do not have highlighted. And the reason for that is it was two brothers that married two sisters, and the two sisters have no other siblings that had children. And so I cannot uniquely identify whether what grandparent these individuals came from. So, but going back a further generation, I was able to verify all of them. So I initially had jumped to John Hilliard being this unknown match. But if you take a look at my tree, this is one of the things that you need to do. How complete is your tree? So we've already talked about James being a brick wall up there on the left where the yellow box is. For the Mounts, I think Stephen Mount married his first cousin or his second cousin. And I have not been able to prove how he and his wife are related. And so there's a whole swath of Mounts that I am related to, but I haven't been able to distinguish which line, which branches they are. And then over on the far right-hand side, I have Asher and Elizabeth H. And I have been able to prove that I am a descendant of them. And I also have shared matches with Edward and Samara. Those are the most common recent ancestor for some of my DNA matches. But for Elizabeth, I have not been able to find any other matches. And she is the daughter of a widowed sailor from Scotland. And that information came from her marriage record. However, their marriage took place after they had 4 children. And so I've always thought that was a little odd, and maybe she is a second wife. And I don't know if you've found out or heard about, but just this week, New York City released their vital records, and those are out in the public now. And so I was playing around with those records, and the Barnett family is from New York City. And so I was able to find Ella's older brother's death certificate. And in that death certificate, he clearly states that, or the informant, which was another sibling of Ella's, clearly states that the mother was Elizabeth Porter and not Elizabeth Haney. So I now believe that Asher married 2 separate women that were both named Elizabeth. So possibly my unknown shared matches from my DNA are from the Porter line or the Haney line. So another thing that I would need to explore. So again, you need to remember that your research plan has to be dynamic. You have to be open up to changes and new information that you discover. And I couldn't figure out where these shared matches came from. So that's why I took the time to diagram my family and to indicate, okay, who do I have shared matches from, what branch lines, and what branch lines I do not have. So, and then finally, we want to talk about when to test. Well, when to test whenever the bug bites you. But I highly recommend that you take a look at the sales. There's always sales going on. DNA Day is April 25th. And then if you miss that sale, you'll have Mother's Day, Father's Day, the 4th of July, Black Friday. All of those typically cut their prices by $30 to $40. And so you'll find testing kits closer to $50 to $60 if you're doing autosomal testing. If you're interested in doing Y-DNA testing, again, they have a percentage that's taken off. And one of the beauties of family tree DNA is they do store your DNA sample and they will take it. You can just pay them more money. You do not have to have the individual do a new kit, and they will test at the sample that they have, and they can upgrade it all the way up to the big Y. And so again, start out with a research plan and then take the time to answer the 5 W's of DNA testing, the who, what, when, where, and why. And that will lead you to an efficient and hopefully an effective path in order to answer your research question. Are there any questions out there?
Feel free to unmute and just ask your question if you would like.
Okay, well, I have a question. So I kept this really basic for the beginning people that may be joining us, but a lot of you guys, all of you guys actually have done DNA testing before, and we are going to continue. This program was so near and dear to Denise's heart. We are going to continue to do this on a quarterly basis with Johnson County. And I want to be able to address and, you know, show you how to answer your questions. What are you guys interested in learning in? What is a stumbling block for you? What would you like to learn more about? So if you want to unmute and just pop in.
I didn't, I don't really have a comment on that. Excuse me. But sorry. That I do have a question. My grandfather's parents are unknown. I found a potential grandfather that I cannot prove. And but I had DNA matches that mentioned his name. So I was pretty confident that even though I hadn't found proof that he was the grandfather of my grandfather, except that then I started getting matches, shared matches, and they had him too. And it turned out he had connections in other places in my tree. So, you know, that kind of blew a hole in my theory. You know, am I getting that from him as my grandparents' grandparent, or is that coming from these other connections, close family connections that, yeah, his name kept turning up. And at first that was a good thing. It made my theory look right. And then when his name came up in two other places, it's kind of like, I don't know anymore. So it's confusing. It's
very confusing. And one of the things that you'll want to do, excuse me, is, do you know his wife, who your grandfather's grandmother might be? Or is both of those?
Yeah. I know my my grandmother's line. It kind of fails right after her mother, but yeah, she was. Actually, I'm working in the same area. Sounds like you do: Washington D.C., Maryland, Virginia. But my Maryland relatives, ancestors, they intermarried a lot.
Yeah.
There are Boswells and Tippets married all over my tree. And it's like, okay, where am I getting all this from, really? And same problem with my West Virginia line. I've got Justices and Brownings and all marrying all the time. And it gets really confusing about figuring out who's coming from where.
Right. Well, one of the things that I think you're exploring right now is tree completeness, as to have you figured out all your other branches and make sure that they are not related in some other manner. One of the things that you can do is take a look at the number of centimorgans that are listed by your match, and to see if they fit into the suggested relationship that you would find. Do you know, are you familiar with DNA Painter?
I've heard about it and
So
looked
if
at the
you-
page.
Yeah, so if you go to DNA Painter, they do have a place, it's a tool that you can use where you plug in those centimorgans and it gives you the potential relationships. So to see whether this DNA match is maybe a second cousin or it's more than likely, a fifth cousin. And it can help narrow down possibly those relationships.
I have
This is
connected.
because this is on your father's line, your
Mhm.
grandfather's grandfather, do you have somebody that you can do Y DNA testing with?
Possibly. I have a cousin that I found that he has tested. That's how I found him. The Ancestry is so convinced that people plugged in the wrong person for my grandfather's parents. And so many people did it that Ancestry throws it out as hints now. And I found this cousin because he realized that it was wrong. He stopped where I did and said, I proved that these people were not his relatives at all. Simple thing, check census, they moved. And my grandfather didn't move, and I knew that. So I found Greg, and he has tested, but yeah, testing the Y DNA might be the answer.
Well-
He did Ancestry, so it's autosomal.
Right. Well, one of the first things I'd recommend doing is asking if he would be willing to share his DNA matches, his match list with you. And then you can take a look and see if you've identified your grandfather's line or in effect identified everybody else, and whoever's left over possibly could be related to your grandfather. And if he's done the same thing, then you can take a look at those individuals that you think may be from that same line, your grandfather's line, and see if that gives you any more clues. Because if you're finding the same individual, the same family, let's say you're finding it, the Smith family, you're finding the Smith family in 3 different branches of your family, maybe he doesn't have that duplication. And maybe he only has one line of Smiths. And so that will help filter out some of that duplication. And you maybe find more matches that are available. So that would probably be the first step. It's relatively easy to do if he's interested in this family line, which sounds like he is, without taking the step of doing another DNA test.
Yeah, we have my grandfather's marriage and death certificate, but we cannot find his birth certificate. And that's the one that would probably give the answer that we need. One thing too is this particular cousin is on my generation. His centimorgan number is like 135, and I found 3 or 2 other cousins a generation down that have higher centimorgan numbers. One of them is the highest one that I have at 450. I'm not getting any with big numbers, so 450. But he's farther away from me. The one at 450 is farther away from me than the one who is at 135, which makes no sense to me.
Yeah, I would just reach out and make sure that I don't know if you've documented all those relationships. And then it could just possibly be that they did not pick up, that piece, that branch of their family is not as strong in their DNA as it is in yours. So a perfect example is my father has tested and his cousin is tested. and they shared their DNA both with me. And by looking at his cousin's test results, I found 2 other second cousins that were not listed with my dad, but were listed in other branches. And so between now, I have 4 different cousins at various levels. I've been able to find a lot more test takers and verified more branches of the family than if I was just looking solely at my dad's results. So collaboration is a huge part of starting to knock down some of those brick walls.
Well, finding this particular cousin was really wonderful because we had another cousin that I knew worked on genealogy, but he's got like a whole box of records. He was able to send me my father's enlistment and discharge records for both wars, which I had never seen before. He scanned pictures for me and emailed them. Some I had, some I didn't. So yeah, finding somebody, getting somebody to answer on Ancestry can be the best thing ever. It's
Right.
like, and the other cousins that I found, like they're younger. One's 32. One was looking for his parentage. And yeah, it's like if you can get people to answer those messages, you can find out so much.
Exactly. Well, it sounds like you have a great first start with having that cousin that you've been in touch with.
Yeah,
So.
definitely. And his father's still living, so but he doesn't know either. You would hope that and because this is his direct grandparent. I don't know what happened, but there was a severing there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
We have Christine has a comment in the chat, and then Heather has a question she would like to ask.
Okay. Can you read her chat?
Oh, it says, I would love to have more training on reading and comparing. Oh, no, that was Pam. Sorry. Christine's. I would love to hear more about strategies to come back down the generations and find more of my living relatives that aren't on my match list.
Okay.
And then
Well,
I think,
great. We can do that.
yeah. And this, I guess Pam has a suggestion for more to learn. I would love to have more training on reading and comparing chromosomes, not DNA painter, but actually knowing how to interpret chromosome matching.
Okay. We
And
can do
then
that.
Heather, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My first question is, and I'm sorry I was late to the Zoom this morning. I flew in late last night. And anyway, my grandmother is dead. Can I update her DNA? Can I upload her DNA to the other family tree and that kind of thing? Or is that?
So you have tested her?
Yes.
Okay. Again, that kind of falls back on that informed consent. If she gave you her DNA to be tested, gave you informed consent to, and you know your grandmother, you know that conversation that you may have had with her.
Right.
But yes, you would be able to transfer her DNA if you have access to her raw DNA data from Ancestry.
Okay. And then my other question is, how many generations back can you go back with the DNA?
It's difficult to say. So if you're going back to your third cousin, more than likely, as you saw, I don't know if you saw the chart when you came in, you'll get at least 50% of those will match with you. When you get to your fourth to sixth cousin level, there is the possibility that you will get matches, but you're not going to be able to pick up all of your fourth cousins or all of your fifth cousins, certainly. The other thing that you need to know is as you go further back in time, you will see individuals that have 7 centimorgans, 8 centimorgans, 10 centimorgans. Pretty much anything lower than 15, I would be a little suspect about, or want more. Maybe I'd want 2 or 3 matches, at least coming from supporting that same branch. Once you get down there, if you take a look, let me see if I can't go back in my PowerPoint. If you take a look at Ancestry's figures for going to the 4th, 5th, and 6th generation, their numbers are higher than the others. And the reason for that is they do something that's called phasing. So let me see if I. I'm gonna try and share my screen here, sorry. So on this screen here, take a look at Ancestry's numbers compared to what you would see at a 4th cousin level, say at 23andMe. And the reason why Ancestry is so much higher is they do something that's called phasing. And so what they're doing is they're taking your DNA and there's pieces, there's gaps there. They're trying to fill in. They don't know whether the DNA, okay, you get DNA from dad and you get DNA from mom, right? And so you get half from dad and half from mom. Ancestry doesn't know whether it's coming from dad, that piece, or if the other piece is coming from mom. And so what they do is they guess, and sometimes they guess wrong. So they may phase something, a piece of dad's DNA, but they merge it onto a piece of mom's DNA. And as a result, you may get false matches. And that typically happens when you're getting down below the 15, 10 centimorgan level, is those phase matches may not be accurate. And so that's why you need to take them with a little bit of grain of salt. That's another reason why Ancestry, when you take a look at your shared match list, they only show shared matches through 20 centimorgans. Now, if you keep scrolling down, or if you filter to specific centimorgan, you'll see you have thousands of matches between 7 or 8 centimorgans and 20 centimorgans that are not listed as a shared match. And some of those are quite valid and quite helpful. You'll find, an 18 centimorgan, 4th or 5th cousin match that's in your list. So I recommend taking a look at those, but they're not automatically in the shared match list. One of the places that you will find them is if their tree matches yours, is in through lines. And so that will pick up some of them. But if you do a surname search with your DNA matches, you may be able to find more. Also, if you do a location search, if you know a small town where your ancestors lived, and search that small town, take a look at who comes back in those results, and maybe you can fit those individuals into your family.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
I put it in your chat under your name. but the more I hear you go, the further down your tree, it sounds like DNA becomes less reliable. And you talked about first matches.
Yeah.
What is the reliability and validity of DNA or the different tests, DNA tests? Are they high percentage? Are they, moderate percentages, or what?
So I would say anybody definitely over 20%, or I'm sorry, 20 centimorgans, those matches are reliable. It's only when you're getting down below the 15 centimorgan level that I would want additional support. But if you find somebody who matches you, maybe they're 60 centimorgans and they're showing as a DNA match, they are related to you somehow, some way. They are blood relation to you.
Or are there any percentages like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, is it a 3 or 5% error deviation or something in when testing with different?
Off the top of my head, I don't know that information. Actually, looking at this chart here, that website, that's the International Society of Genetic Genealogy.org. That's what ISOG stands for. And so that's where some of the top professionals in their field of genetic genealogy have written all kinds of articles, provided all kinds of statistics. And so in order to answer your question, that's probably the first place I would look to see if you can't find some statistics.
Thank you.
Any other questions or any other? I'm really interested in, I have a couple of great ideas, but I'm really interested in what are you guys interested in learning? What topics would you like to be covered in our programs in the future?
I'd like to know, sorry.
Yeah, Judith.
I'd like to know more. I'd like to know more about how you can use people in the same geographical area, maybe a county or a town, how you can use those to figure out some of your unknowns. For example, Elizabeth ? In some of mine, the women are just given as Elizabeth or something like that. And I know you're supposed to be able to go back and look at people who were living in that same area that might be able to tell you who that person was so that you could follow their lines. Did I make sense?
Yeah, you did. Have you gone through your match list and sorted them, like use the colored dots and sorted who your
Yes.
matches are and belong to? So I would just real
Yes.
quickly, I'd take a look at that ancestral couple and figure out where they were living at the time. And then actually it's more a matter of, trying to dig into what surnames show up in your DNA match list, and then take a look at stuff like land records and wills to see if you can't find any individuals that are related to your family that way. that's a real quick way to, look at location. It's really having to dig into that place and those records, because you have to remember, depending on the time, most people married within probably about 20 miles of where they lived, wherever they can get on a horse or walk to go and visit whoever they're interested in marrying and get back home in one day, because they had morning chores and they had evening chores, and more than likely they weren't spending the night unless they were going and spending the summer with another relation. So you'll find the family in some sort of connection with that location. So more than likely your Elizabeth lived in that same location where she got married, where she had children. So dig into the wills and dig into the land records.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There were a couple other things mentioned in the chat. Someone asked when we were going to have the next few sessions, and I said we've only really scheduled the June one on June 11th, I think it was, but we'll also have one in September and December to be decided later. There was thanks for the recording. Pam mentioned she'd like to know more about how to use through lines a bit better for a future topic.
Okay.
And Andrea is kind of in the same boat I am, haven't done genealogy research since 1990. So this is all blowing my mind. So she wants to learn everything. So
Awesome.
Patty asks or says that she's interested in organizing matches and examples of how to use matches well to solve a specific research or question in an organized, focused fashion.
Okay.
Got even more suggestions. Heather says maybe more in-depth discussion about ancestry, family tree, MyHeritage. Each of these are pretty complex. Each have different things. I would like to listen to a talk about European searching. So there's a lot there. And I guess that's the end.
All right. Some great ideas. And so I'm hoping to build this program to address the audience at their level and what you're interested in. So if you think of anything additional, I believe my name and email address is on the handout. If it's not,
Yes.
my
Yes, it
email
is.
address is angegunce@gmail.com. It's really easy. That's ANGE. And feel free to reach out and get in touch with me. I may not get back in touch with you within 24 hours, but I certainly enjoy talking about DNA, helping people work through problems, taking a look at somebody's shared match list and seeing if I can't help out with those various questions you may have.
Anyone have any other comments or questions? This has been a great program this morning.
Very good.
Thank you all for joining us.
Yes, I will attempt to wrangle this recording thing and send out information about how you can get to it. I'm not sure if it'll be posted in the library's YouTube channel or through Facebook or something. So give me a few days to get all that sorted out. And for everyone who registered, I will certainly send out information about how you can access that recording and how long it will be available. So watch for that.
Great job, Angela.
Thank you, Rick. I appreciate that.
Yeah, very good job. You had big shoes to fill, and I think you've done a great job.
Thank you. Well, the sun is slowly creeping out up here. I live in Fisher, so maybe the weather is improving down in your neck of the woods as well. So enjoy your Saturday. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Yes, thank you, everyone.